everybody, it's me. I wasn't here last week. Had to take care of some doctor's appointments, things like that. Lovely fun. But here I am today. Finally get to talk to you about scrap quilting. I am a scrap quilter. I would consider myself a scrap quilter. Not in the traditional sense like your grandmother was a scrap quilter, but a modern scrap quilter, I guess you would say. And I want to talk to you today about the difference in those and how I go about saving my scraps now as opposed to the way I used to do it. And then I want to show you a milestone for me at the end. So let's get started on all that. Okay, so your traditional quilts, like I said, your grandmother's scrap quilts, right, were more like this. You see that I just did a Google search, and this is the old, what you think of when you think of a scrap quilt. It's quilts made out of scraps, just whatever you had left on hand, you just kind of put together in a 9-patch or whatever, and this is what you came out with. So today, scrap quilting is all the rage. It's new, and I think that might be, I don't know, but part of it probably has to do with COVID, and the fact that we all, quilters, stayed home and tried to stay home anyway, and made quilts out of what they had. So you will see a lot of people making scrap quilts from last year and this year because we just didn't go to the stores as much. So we used more of what we had. So this is what the modern scrap quilts look like. Big difference in the traditional, there's your grandmother's quilts, right? And today's quilts. These are scrap quilts also. If somebody asked me what a scrap quilt was, I would say, well, back when your grandmother was making them in the 30s, 40s, 50s, whatever, they were made out of scraps from clothing, scraps, traditionally scraps, okay? Now they're made from what you have left over from your quilts that you bought fabric for, maybe, okay? So you can still do quilts that are planned. They're made with the scraps, the leftovers, but they're actually modern in that you use let's say the same background through the whole quilt, so it ties it all together. Or you'll use all of your oranges and purples, or whatever. So the quilts today, the scrap quilts today, look like any other quilt, really. If you play with contrast and tones in your colors and that kind of thing, you can make a scrap quilt look like any other quilt. So I like to think that I'm a scrap quilter because I like to use what I've got. I don't like to go buy if I don't have to. And oh my gosh, I have so much fabric that I don't have to go buy. Now, the problem with me having so much fabric is that I started to get really overwhelmed with my scraps. So what was happening was I was like saving fabrics, and like I would cut out a dress for a child or whatever out of the cotton fabrics, and I would save the fabrics pieces that were left over by color. Okay, so I had first I started with little sacks or whatever, grocery bags, that kind of thing, and then I moved to drawers and that kind of thing, and I had them separated by color. And I thought, the thinking was that if I needed a pink for a particular quilt, I would go to my pink drawer and I would pull out the pink that I needed, right? Well, that never happened. I can say that pretty much never happened. I just looked at the pink drawer and thought, yeah, I don't want to sort through that. I'm just going to go buy the pink that I need. I can get just the right pink and so forth, right? So the drawers that were full of pink and red and green and whatever got more full and more full and more full. And then all of a sudden I have all these fabrics and I'm like, oh my gosh, I've got to use these. I've got to do something. But what do I do? So what I did was about 2 years ago, I decided, okay, that's it. I'm going to go through these scraps and I'm going to cut them up into pieces, because what was happening was the pre-cuts started coming out, and you could buy a charm pack or a layer cake or whatever, jelly rolls, right? And I thought, I'm not going to go buy that. That's just a roll of scraps. It's a roll of various colors all put together. They're so nice and neat, and they look, they coordinate, right? Well, I have so many fabrics that I can do the same thing. I can cut those strips and put them together, and I can make my own jelly roll at this point, right? And so about 2 years ago, I decided to start cutting, and I was determined to cut all of my scraps up that I had at the time into squares and strips and so forth, right? And get them organized, and then I would be able to basically shop my stash. So that's what I did. And I will show you at the end the video of the last scrap being cut from that set. Right now, since I cut that last week, I have new scraps, but we won't go there. I'll show you that later. So anyway, before I move over to the way that I organize my scraps and everything, I want to show you, this is actually a scrap quilt that I just started working on. See, it's just a printout. It looks like a regular normal quilt, but it's made all completely with scraps that I had in my stash, in my drawers. I just went and pulled out. These are 2.5-inch square HSTs, half square triangles. I just pulled out pinks, blues, and neutrals. And there you go. I did not have to buy a single piece of fabric. It's great. So let me go over and show you. This is going to look kind of chaotic because I'm showing you my sewing room. So let's see. Let's go here. Now I've repositioned the camera, so this is either going to work or fail miserably. So here we go. Okay. So I have to duck. Okay. So these are my scraps here, right? And I've got a whole wall over here of them. Okay. Now what I did was I took pieces of fabric and I started cutting at the largest piece possible, and then cut them down. If it was a fat quarter or larger, then I'll show you what I did with that. But a fat quarter got folded into a fat quarter, and I have a drawer of fat quarters, or a couple drawers of fat quarters. But if it was less than a fat quarter, I started cutting into squares and strips. Okay, so these are my squares and strips. Oops, hold on a second. Hold on. Yep. Let's see if this one works. Sorry. Yep, that works. Okay. Okay. So, use this mouse and go over here. Here. Okay. So, what I did was I cut. Oh, please don't move. Don't do that. Okay. All right. So, like this drawer right here, it has 2.5-inch squares in it. Okay. These are all white squares. Okay. All red squares. So the first thing I did was I cut them into squares of different sizes, and I will put up a chart here in a few minutes that'll show you the sizes that I used. You can use whatever, you can cut into whatever sizes you like, but for example, I don't cut into 3-inch squares because I don't use 3-inch squares. I just don't. I use 3.5-inch squares and 2.5, but I just don't use 3-inch, so I don't cut those. But anyway, I cut into the squares first, and I just started putting them in drawers. Then I went back and I organized by color, and this is what I came up with. So if I need, for a pattern, if it calls for 2.5-inch square, red, then I've got all these reds, right? And they're pre-cut, so I don't have to go cut them. Now, when you have fabrics left over from projects, you end up with stuff that's cut. Well, all these are whatever. Anyway, you end up with stuff like this, and you just toss it in a drawer. Well, I don't know what size that is, okay? But I know when I get that cut and put into my drawer, I know exactly what I've got, all right? So, and I keep a basket that I toss my scraps into. These are my current ones. And whenever I have a few minutes, if I'm waiting for my husband to get in the car to go somewhere or something like that, I'll come in here and I'll just cut up a few squares till they're all done. So hopefully this camera won't move when I put this drawer back in here. Gently, gently. Okay, so that's the squares. Oh, there it goes. There's the squares, and then you've got, see, I've got strips. I line those up this way, right? 2-inch strips, 2.5-inch strips, right? And it goes on for days. I mean, there's just strips and strips and strips. Okay, so then, I'll show this to you later. Okay, so if I have something between a fat quarter and, hold on. Okay, something between a fat quarter and a yard, okay? It's not quite big enough to put like on a bolt, but it's bigger than a fat quarter, so it's a good bit of fabric, right? Well, I take these little boards and wind my fabric onto them, okay? I cut cardboard into 6x6 squares, and that's what I wrap these on. And then I put them by color on my shelf. So I know how much is on those, right? Anything a yard and above will go, I don't know if you can see them, but up here, there's some bolts of fabric. That's what I do with that. I wonder if I can turn this around. Let's see. Let's try it. Bear with me. This may or may not work. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So there, you can see the bolts, right? Okay. So that's my system. I have fabrics in bolts. I have fabrics in small bolts. Then I have strips and I have squares. And I even make squares 18 by 18 inches or smaller, but at least I know what I've got. You know, I know how much of that fabric I have. So, and the beauty of the strips is that I can pull out a strip if I need, okay, if I need 2.5-inch squares of purple and I don't quite have enough of those purples that I want. What I do is I go from there over to my 2.5-inch strips and I just cut off 2.5-inch squares of purple off of those strips, right? And then if I don't have enough of those, I just move up a level to the 3.5-inch strips because there's probably some purple over there, and I cut that strip down and then I cut those squares off of that. So I'm using up my scraps and not having to go buy, you know, the jelly rolls, which are expensive, and so forth. Now, sometimes, you know, that's a good thing to do for your birthday or for whatever. Or if you have a specific quilt that you want to make out of specific colors, specific fabrics by a particular designer, that's great. But otherwise, I mean, my goodness, look at all this fabric that I didn't have to go buy. So that is my system for doing that. And I just cut the last scrap of all of those bags. It took me 2 years to cut them all up. That's how many I had. But I was determined to do it. And once I got it done, I was like, wow, this is so much better than I even thought it could ever be. So I did want to show you this book. I highly, highly recommend. Can you see that? Yeah. And this is going to be in the description below in the video. This is one of my favorite scrap quilting books by far. I have several other scrap quilting books, but this is an excellent one. if you're looking to make a scrap quilt that doesn't necessarily look like your grandmother's scrap quilt. Hold on. See? Pretty. Yeah. Okay. So let's go back over here. Let me see. Back to there. Here we go. That didn't work too bad. Oh, somebody's watching. Hello. Say hi if you're watching, if you can. That'd be awesome. Okay. So I wanted to show you traditional. I want to show you modern. I did that. Okay. Here is the chart that I use. My strips, if they're 8 inches or longer, they stay in strip form. If they are shorter than 8 inches, I cut them down into the squares. You can see the highlights mean nothing other than it's an easy way to see what I'm doing. So there's no real reason why they're highlighted, just so you can see it better. Those are the square sizes that I use. I don't cut 3-inch and I don't cut 4-inch squares. I do cut 5.5. That's not on there, but I do cut 5.5. So I think that's everything. I will show you my last video and see you next week. Do subscribe, please, if you can. As a favor to me, tomorrow's my birthday, so if you can subscribe, that'd be awesome. New Mexico? NM. Is that New Mexico? Maybe? Let's see if she answers me. That would be fabulous. Awesome. Okay. On your break. Great. I really hope you like the video. It was just a short thing to show you what I do with my scraps, so I'm not like covered and overwhelmed. So I hope you enjoy it, and I am going to show you this last video, and I will see you guys next week. See you next week, Judy. Thanks for joining me. Thank you.